The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Welcome once again to Ask Claire, a program along the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And I'm Claire Hall, your host for this weekly discussion of baseball, literature, and life, and all things good. And it's always a good week when I'm joined by my sometimes co-host, Gabriel Schecter. Gabriel, good afternoon. How are you today, sir?
It is a good afternoon. I'm fine. A little gray and wet outside, but I'm fine. How are you?
Lordy, yes. I'm good. We're both in Western Oregon, and this has been a pretty blustery 24 hours, even by Oregon standards. Damp and gray, but I think it's why we enjoy the green abundance of spring and summer and fall that we do. So,
absolutely.
Today, we want to talk about baseball literature and a couple of authors whose work I think we both appreciate and enjoy. And what if we start off with Darryl Brock? And he came right out of the chute with a pretty amazing novel that combines two of my loves, and I think two of yours as well, baseball and time travel. And so the table is set. Tell us about If I Never Get Back.
If I Never Get Back, the baseball time travel novel in which Sam Fowler goes back to the 1869 Cincinnati Red Stockings, the first openly professional team that went on the road for 70 or 80 games over a period of a year or so. And in Darryl Brock's novel, Sam Fowler becomes a member of this squad, sort of the last-ditch reserve player. He becomes a sort of business manager and liaison, and invents the hot dog, and does all sorts of very neat and cool things. But it's a very richly detailed novel about what it was like in those early days of baseball, where the rules and playing conditions were chaotic and always changing. And it's a real great picaresque novel and a tour de force.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, I remember just truly being captivated when I read it, that it's a rare author who can really give you, I don't know, what did Hemingway say? The good, the bad, and how a couple of other phrases, and how the weather was. And he truly puts you right there. I mean, gives you the whole thing. And of course, there's a romantic interest as well.
Oh yeah.
And
have you read his non-baseball sequel to If I Never Get Back? It's called Two in the Field.
Yes, I have. That came out about a dozen years later. I'm looking at my crib sheet. 1989 for If I Never Get Back, and then Two in the Field, 2002.
Right.
Yeah.
A couple of the Red Stockings settled in the Midwest, and there is about to be an Irish uprising against Canada, and it's a really charming novel. But we should talk about Darryl Brock's other baseball novel. And I was thinking about this. Most of the well-known popular baseball novels are what the English would call a one-off.
Yes.
The guy had a great idea for a baseball novel. Sometimes a major novelist like Philip Roth or Bernard Malamud Robert Coover's Universal Baseball Association is another good example. These are great ideas, and the writing of them is a kind of tour de force, where the author threw everything he could into it, everything he loved about baseball, whether it was the names or the mythology, and they were done with it. But there's a small handful of writers who came up with a second great novel. And I think Darryl Brock's second novel is better than If I Never Get Back. It's called Havana Heat. And it's a story with a great thematic and emotional depth. It's set in 1911 in Cuba when the New York Giants made an exhibition tour after losing the World Series. And the narrator is Dummy Taylor, deaf dumb pitcher who was retired by then and a sort of coach and traveling with them. And while in Cuba, he hears about a teenage boy, a phenomenal pitcher, but he lives in the jungle, out in the middle of nowhere, and he's deaf. And Dummy Taylor goes to scout this teenage boy in the Cuban jungle. And the novel is mainly about their relationship, the bond formed between these two men who don't speak the same language, but have the same worldview because of their deafness. It's a deeply moving novel.
Yes, I mean, If I Never Get Back got a lot of popular and critical attention, and then, frankly, I don't even remember how I stumbled upon Havana Heat, but I thought, this is wonderful. It's also kind of sad that it really hasn't attained the kind of exposure that it deserves.
Oh, I agree, absolutely.
Even though it takes place decades after If I Never Get Back, just really, I think in tone and feel, it's very, in atmospherics, I find it very reminiscent of If I Never Get Back. The characters who are deaf mutes certainly are compelling, and what a great supporting cast. I mean, John McGraw's Giants, Turkey Mike Donlin, one of the great characters of early 20th century baseball.
And the novel starts with a really nice scene that includes my guy, Victory Faust. And
yes,
he did a nice job with it.
Yeah. Now, you have maintained some correspondence with Darryl Brock through the years, and it seems like 19th century Americana is really one of his passions, one of his fascinations. He's written about Mark Twain. And if I recall correctly, he, at one point was contemplating a third book in the series with If I Never Get Back. And can you talk about that and what happened there?
Yeah, he had an idea for a time about another Sam Fowler novel, and it's too bad he hasn't written it, but we've got plenty of Sam as it is. The things that make his novels compelling are the authenticity of the details. It just more than most baseball novels, you get such a strong sense of the place, being right in the middle of it. And in 1869, the smells of whatever is being served at the ballparks before Sam Fowler invents the hot dog. The sounds, the feel of everything. Darryl Brock was good friends with Jack Finney, the novelist who wrote Time and Again. Certainly one of the best time travel novels, and they share the thoroughness of historians who love to do research and find the little details that allow you to connect the dots of history, and hence the interest in time travel, I think.
Yeah, Finney was certainly a master of the time travel novel as well, and I was really thinking there definitely is an affinity, and certainly it's the atmospherics, but it to me, and I'm struggling a little bit to come up with exactly what I'm trying to express here, but it's more than just the accumulation of sensory detail, even though both authors present that in abundance. I think maybe the fact that you're so engaged from the point of view of their protagonist, experiencing all these strange sights, sounds, people, being really kind of the ultimate stranger in a strange land, and having to adapt to a whole world that you're the outsider, and it's just coming to me as I try to articulate it. But does that make sense to you, my friend?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, as you were saying, definitely Darryl Brock is not a one-hit wonder with the baseball novels, and certainly, we were talking before the program, and I think another example of that would be Mark Harris, who came up with a trio of novels about a player named Henry Wiggin in the 1950s, and then almost 20 years later returned for a fourth book in that series. But would you please talk a bit about the Henry Wiggin books and what makes them so compelling?
Well, you talk about an engaging voice of a narrator, and that's Henry Wiggin in The Southpaw, the first of Mark Harris's baseball novels. The character himself is based on Ring Lardner's "You Know Me, Al."
Yes,
and his braggart of a pitcher is superbly talented, with a huge ego, and the whole world revolves around him, and not a whole lot of empathy or interest in others, but so intense and enthusiastic and so full of himself that the narrative just sweeps you along. And then, just as the Southpaw, like If I Never Get Back, is a kind of a literary tour de force. It's just right. And then, like Brock, Mark Harris came back with a story of great sensitivity and a very personal story. Bang the Drum Slowly. Later made into a fine movie, although Robert De Niro was a strange casting, I thought. But it's a story about a catcher who's dying, and how his teammates rally around him. And it's an interesting pair of novels. I was thinking about Harris's too, and Darryl Brock's too, and the similarity in tone and nature. That the second novel was more a novel that happened around baseball than a baseball novel. I honestly think that Brock's are somewhat better than Harris's. I'm just blown away more by the tour de force and more moved by the second story. And this is not to criticize Harris. His are wonderful. I just happen to think Brock's are better. And I wanted to say something else about Brock's. I think Havana Heat is a greater achievement because it required more imagination. And that's, I think, an odd comment given that he absolutely recreated 1869 baseball. But what I mean is, basing If I Never Get Back on the actual Red Stockings and their players and where they went and how the games went, he had kind of a built-in structure. So he was imaginatively filling in the details of a structure that was already there. Mm-hmm. In Havana Heat, he created the entire story, and I think that extra bit of effort required was certainly forthcoming. Yeah, it is quite an achievement. It's been quite a few years since I've read it, but I think this conversation is inspiring me. It will probably soon be one of the very few books that I read a second time because I think I could profit from it a second time. Can we jump back? I'm thinking the same thing too, Claire, about both good. Harris and Brock. Yeah, great minds in the same path, right? Could we jump back to Harris for just a minute? I think, discovered the original Henry Wigan books, I remember in 1979 probably, so I would have been in college, was really, I think, getting into baseball literature in a serious way. And there was a bit of a mini flurry of publicity when It Looked Like Forever came out. And so, the fact that he was returning to a character that after almost 20 years and just the sense of, I'd be interested in your take on it. I was maybe too young to fully appreciate at the time, but I have not read the fourth one. Oh, okay. Well, maybe so you got me on that one. You talk about it. Okay, something to put on your list someday. That after, all right. After 19 years with the Mammoths, Henry Wigan is cut loose. He ends up with a California team, and I probably shouldn't spoil it beyond that, but to me at least it was an interesting meditation. Again, kind of a book about, just as all good books are maybe incidentally about baseball, but a story about coming to terms with, what for an athlete, I guess, is your first mortality, that realizing your athletic career is coming to an end, even though you hopefully have decades of life ahead. Well, we have explored two authors, baseball authors who both have left their mark, both who we admire. We've got a few minutes left. Probably when people think about baseball fiction, inevitably somebody listening is going to say, well, how come they aren't talking about W.P. Kinsella and Shoeless Joe? So anything you'd like to offer up on the late Mr. Kinsella? Yes. There are two sacred baseball novels that I think stink. Shoeless Joe is one of them. Elaborate, please. The thing I most resent about Shoeless Joe is Kinsella kidnapping J.D. Salinger. To me, it was the opposite of what Mark Harris and Darryl Brock did. He took the Salinger figure that most of us have an image of, and he started with that and just kidnapped the character and brought him along for no apparent reason other than he had an idea. Wouldn't it be fun get Salinger in a novel. The proof of it is that in the movie, they created a character in James Earl Jones who was far more compelling and whose story had much more to do with Ray's story, the actual, subject of the movie. And also, yes.
So
also, the writing
is what? I'm sorry.
The writing is sophomoric. I mean, just the style and the diction are pretty clumsy in my view, and it's just the whole thing is kind of shallow. To me, comparing Shoeless Joe to Darryl Brock's novels or Mark Harris's is like comparing Love Story to Madame Bovary or Anna Karenina. It's just a very slim, minimal effort where he used just a little bit of imagination to steal someone else's story. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, so you're saying, just to put it in slightly different terms, he cheated by bringing in Salinger. He took a shortcut that he didn't need to take.
Yes, exactly. And since you asked, I'll mention the other sacred baseball novel that I don't care for.
I was going to say, don't leave us hanging. Okay.
The Natural, Bernard Malamud, and I think his mistake, a mistake he made because he's not really a baseball fan, was he tried to fit a baseball story into classical mythology. Mm-hmm. He has this idea that baseball is like myth, and there were certain ancient myths that he thought fit the contours of a baseball story. But it's almost an irrelevant approach because what Coover does in the Universal Baseball Association or Roth does in the Great American Novel is to recognize that baseball is its own mythology. You don't have to plug baseball into some other mythology to give it meaning. Baseball creates its own mythology, and it can be completely understood on its own terms. So I think Malamud had kind of an intellectual exercise in mind, and he got preoccupied with that.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes left, so how about if we talk just a little bit more? I would love to hear your thoughts on a novel that you've mentioned a couple of times now, and I think we both admire it, and Baseball Simulation, the Universal Baseball Association, J. Henry Waugh Prop. How's that for a mouthful of a title? But quite a compelling book. The hero, the protagonist, is an accountant who really seems to not live much of a life at all outside of his work, other than this rather elaborate baseball dice game that he's created. Yeah. But unlike something like ATBA or Stratomatic, which simulates the performance of real life players, he has created his own players, and not merely created the games, but their life histories, and really it's a whole fictional universe that he inhabits nightly. And and at least in the ending, my feeling is perhaps do we get a clue that maybe our hero has been swallowed up in his own universe? I don't know. I've always thought it a little enigmatic, but maybe that's the way it's supposed to be.
Talk about a tour de force. I don't think anybody had more fun writing a baseball novel than Robert Coover had writing that one. especially the creation of names. It just relishes the linkage of a person's name to his character, to his playing style. And as you get further into the novel, you realize that the dice game happening on his dining room table is just the tip of the iceberg to what this game means to him. And it's an exercise in imagination for him to give such meaning to this game. And for him writing the history of the league, the front office and behind the scenes stuff is just as important as what happens in the games. It's really a remarkable achievement to create an entire league, its history, its lore, its icons, and it's just really remarkable.
Yeah, that is one book that I did reread just a few years ago, and something that I had forgotten, but it was delightful to discover as I was rereading it. The protagonist is 56 years old, and I was 56 when I reread it. But you're right. I mean, the names, just the names alone. Hatrack Hines, Hellborn, Melbourne Trench. I mean, and taking the names of actual 19th century clubs as his inspiration, but it's a true delight.
If we have another minute or two, I would like to mention a little-known baseball novel that I happen to like a lot. It's called The Greatest Slump of All Time, written by a man named David Carkeet, and just talking about naming players. One of the things I like about the novel is the naming of players, and he's got a little second baseman who feels insecure. He's not that great a player, but he knows if he can get a nickname, that he'll earn a place because they'll always have an identification. And he struggles. He tries this nickname and that. He can't get anything to last. And so finally, you know what they call him? Nickname.
Nope.
Nickname to more. Yes.
I've got to love
it.
Okay. Well, I will have to, I've got to admit I haven't read that one yet. Yeah,
yep.
On that note, I guess it's time to sign off, but always a delight. Gabriel Schecter, lover of baseball, lover of literature, rock and tour, Renaissance man, friend. Thank you for...
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for an entertaining half hour, and we'll see you soon, okay?
Great, thanks. It was fun, Claire, as always.
Okay, and this is Claire Hall signing off, and until the next episode, until we meet again, happy trails.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.